All right. Welcome to the new year, everybody. A new year for heavy hands. A new heavy hands, in fact. No, not really. In fact, this is going to be Heavy Hands Flu Edition. That means Phil and I, with our congested voices and our even more congested heads, and I want to emphasize that in case you notice any bizarre leaps in logic, please feel free to let us know and lambast us, but also have some forgiveness in your heart. Both of us, our brains aren't exactly working at peak capacity in this episode. Someone said online, why I thought you guys might be taking the week off. And you know what, folks? Maybe we should have, but the grind never stops. So this week we decided to talk about Bellator champions versus UFC champions. Used to be a fun topic for me back in the day when Strikeforce was like the big competing promotion to the UFC. And it was genuinely interesting to talk about how the top fighters of Strikeforce stacked up against the top fighters in the UFC. And of course, when those promotions merged, we saw them compete very, very well. And a lot of them become champions themselves or longtime contenders. So that's the topic for today's episode. I just want to preface all of it by saying there are going to be no breaks between segments. We didn't do that. We just kind of talked for an hour. And again, we may seem a little sick in more ways than one, and in more ways than the usual. Phil, of course, is more perverse than he's ever been before on this episode. So I just want to say thank you all so much for patronizing the show in 2019 and for supporting us and all of your wonderful comments and supporting us on Patreon, literally patronizing us. We love you. Thank you for bearing with us on this sick week. And next week, we are going to be back in a big way with maximum cynicism and lots of fun technical analysis for UFC 246. So until then, enjoy the show. Okay, welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands. Before any of you say anything, yes, I'm sick. And Phil, let them hear your mellifluous voice.
I am also sick.
We're both sick. So anytime each of us makes each other laugh, you're going to hear a lot of this sort of sound. And then turning away from the mic to cough. Tay-Zon Day style. Timely reference. Anyway, I'm Connor Rebush, your host. With me, as always, is Phil McKenzie. And we weren't really sure what to do this week's episode about, were we, Phil? Because the UFC 246 is not this week, but in fact, the UFC has opted to give us 3 weeks off around the holidays. So Conor McGregor versus Cowboy Cerrone is not happening until next week.
Yep. It's another dead zone, and one which we were particularly ill-equipped to fill because yes. Both of us have had our heads stuffed with cotton wool and snot.
Yeah, and judging by the fact that each of us across the Atlantic Ocean, we were both struck with this flu, whatever it is, at the same time, I'm going to go ahead and guess that a good chunk of the people listening to this are also sick at the same time. So hopefully you will just enjoy knowing that A, it gets better after about 2.5 days. You'll start to feel much better. Make sure you sleep, stay hydrated. And B, we are here to just sort of ramble about whatever. And Phil suggested a topic for this week's episode. Again, we may just sort of be discovering what we're talking about as we go here. But to jump us in, we wanted to talk about basically the Bellator versus UFC, more specifically Bellator's champs versus the UFC's champs. I have noticed a lot of, specifically with Douglas Lima lately, people talking about how Douglas Lima is in fact the best welterweight in the world. And strangely, no one is arguing that Ryan Bader is the best heavyweight in the world, although I don't know, he might be. So we're going to go ahead and just talk about that as a jumping off point. I guess we should start with Ryan Bader, poor benighted Ryan Bader, being the heavyweight champion, and talk about him in comparison to, oh god, it's Stipe Miocic again. And then we get to talk about Ryan Bader versus John Jones, because he is in fact one of two double champs in Bellator at the moment. Phil, why is Ryan Bader always getting so much shade? Is it because he tends to implode whenever he fights someone that he's like a little scared of? Because otherwise,
yes,
because otherwise he's really good. You know, as far as like light heavyweight fighters go, he's pretty great.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, obviously, I think you can get away with having one terrible performance where you just completely shit the bed and look utterly impotent or do something incredibly stupid. I think you can probably, and this is, you know, in the court of public opinion of fandom, you can probably just about survive two.
Uh-huh.
I think when you're reaching four...
Uh-huh.
That's when things are starting to look bad. Like, that's when that becomes what people associate with you. So, both, you know, there was the first John Jones loss where he looked, you know, utterly terrified. The Tito Ortiz knockout. The Glover Teixeira thing. Please. Yeah.
Getting knocked down and then guillotined by Tito Ortiz.
Yes. And then finally... When everyone thought he'd, you know, turned it all around.
Yeah.
Anthony Johnson.
Yeah, he really had a phenomenal run leading up to that Anthony Johnson fight, too.
Uh-huh.
You know what the thing is with Ryan Bader? He hasn't really proved that that's not still the case. In all this time as a Bellator contender and champion and now double champ. Because, like, I look at this resume. Who's the best fighter on here? Is it Matt Mitrione?
It is Phil Davis by a large metric.
It's Phil Davis. And that was, I actually thought it was a good fight. I know a lot of people thought it was boring. I thought it was all right. Well contested.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
But Phil Davis also certainly not the guy you're going to get psyched out about fighting. Otherwise... I don't know, like if it was going to happen, maybe it would be against Fedor, but Fedor literally can't take a punch. So, you know, all you have to do is just run out there and hit him, which is something that like a scared Ryan Bader would have tried to do anyway. So I don't know. That doesn't say any particularly good things to me about how Ryan Bader might stack up in a potential imaginary fight with Stipe Miocic. Like, let's take a look at the Stipe Miocic resume while we're at it. Because Stipe is very mentally and physically durable. Like, that is... Those two things are very important at heavyweight. The man is incredibly difficult to break. Like, as we saw in the Daniel Cormier fights, you really have to knock him out to stop him trying to knock you out. We also saw that in his first fight with Junior Dos Santos. Crazy back-and-forth war. I just think it's pretty undeniable that Stipe Miocic is a better heavyweight than Ryan Bader.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to like about Ryan Bader's game. He's built it to insulate himself a bit more from his own, you know, fears. He's gotten a lot better at just moving on the outside and playing off the jab and the left hook without necessarily getting himself stuck into exchanges with big punches.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you got to think that against Stipe Miocic in particular, that's a guy who would be just happy to wade forward and hit him with power. I actually do think that Daniel Cormier would have been a much better matchup for Ryan Bader. I think the same basic problems would still arise in that he's just not as mentally and physically tough as Daniel Cormier, and that when the fight eventually devolved into a brawl, that he would still be in bad trouble.
Mm-hmm.
But I still think that Bader is a more willing and active body kicker than he used to be. He fights off a long jab. He's basically a better outfighter than, I would say, anyone except John Jones, and that's a very, in some ways he's a better, I think his pure boxing is better than John Jones, but I think he's, from those perspectives, he's a better outfighter than, for example, Alexander Gustafsson, who gave Cormier a lot of problems. I think, yeah, but the same basic issue with like him just not being really there for knockdown, drag out wars with big tough hitters.
Yeah, I mean that is the thing. He has notably gotten better and more comfortable as a striker over the last few years. Like that was the thing in that run before the Anthony Johnson fight. But again, like despite those improvements at the time, he still showed that he would just make terrible decisions in the face of something like very stressful. So yeah, I mean, I also think like you find out, you would find out, even if Bader himself didn't throw it away, all of the sort of technical gaps in his new style of striking against someone who just is willing to stand their ground and fire back. Like, I like his strike output and strike selection. I like the fact that he moves his feet now and maintains a good distance. But like the man is begging to be countered whenever he throws one of those big body kicks. You know, the jab is frequently counterable. He tends to get really high up on his toes and have his chin really high in the air. I just think, I don't know. Yeah, against a Stipe Miocic or a Daniel Cormier, just being willing to plant their feet and throw back whenever Bader engages, you would quickly realize that all the technical improvements in the world may not be enough to make up for the fact that Bader can get knocked the fuck out by good hitters. So, all right, enough about Ryan Bader. Let's talk about Ryan Bader versus John Jones. Is it? I mean, I don't know. That's kind of interesting, I guess. I mean, I do wish we got to see. I may be the only person on the planet who thinks this. I do wish we did get to see Bader versus Cormier. Mm-hmm. Even though not getting it did result in Cormier delivering one of the most savage burns ever. That was a fight that I was compelled by. I was like, ooh, that sounds interesting. I want to see how these two wrestlers match up. As for Bader against John Jones, you know what? I think it might be surprisingly interesting.
Yep.
Because it's not like John Jones is much of a knockout puncher. Contesting a fight contested at the range where Jones is usually dominant against it's basically like the Thiago Santos fight in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Plus phenomenal wrestling ability. I mean, you would have to, I would probably just assume that Jones's durability is a deciding factor. And probably that in fighting John Jones, Ryan Bader would freak out and make a terrible decision and probably get knocked out or get submitted.
Yeah, I mean, I think the basic dynamics of it are kind of similar to what a Jan Blachowicz fight would look like, you know, with the exception of, you know, Jan being a better striker and a worse wrestler. But in the, yeah, there's nothing really stopping Bader from competing in that fight unless he just shat the bed, which is, as we've mentioned, he is not, you know, a man who you can be sure is going to leave the bed unbeshitted. But yeah, I mean, if they just had like a range kickboxing match and they just traded jabs and kicks for 5 rounds, I would expect Jones to win, but I wouldn't be shocked if he lost, and it would be hilarious if he did.
Yeah, I mean, you know, they had their first fight, but it was very, very clear. I mean, again, we saw even then that just like doing crazy, flashy shit can really cow Ryan Bader. But you know, Bader is he's way, way more competent at range now than he was then. It would be an interesting test of the style matchups never change dynamic.
Yeah, because I think, you know, as we've mentioned a bunch of times, John Jones is someone who has such an inherent grasp of MMA, such a natural talent for it, that I think it has stunted his development. That everything has come so easily to him that he's just kind of done whatever he wanted. And Bader, on the other hand, has been someone who has just had to doggedly stick his head down and learn what is good and functional, because every time he's gone outside of the lines, he's gotten completely annihilated in hilarious ways. Everything about his career just says, do the technically good stuff more, Ryan. Stay disciplined. Whereas everything about John Jones's career just says, you can pretty much do whatever you want.
Yeah.
So yeah, it could be another. I think it would probably be another one of those fights where John Jones would come in incredibly overconfident. But yeah, on balance, you still got to favor John Jones just for strikeout. But I mean, that Phil Davis fight against Bader, I thought that was actually a shockingly, like the second one, it was a terrible decision in that it was a split. I didn't think that fight was particularly close at all. I thought their first fight was very, very close, but I thought in the rematch, I think Bader looked clearly ahead to me. But that Phil Davis is still the closest analog to John Jones that Ryan Bader has fought, and that he's not clearly beating. He's not clearly beating Phil Davis in the judges' eyes, at least. Doesn't say good things about how well he'd do in that kind of fight. So I think it would be competitive, but I sadly would not pick him to win it.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to middleweights. This one I don't think is a particularly difficult one to assess. Rafael Lovato Jr. versus Israel Adesanya. I mean, I'm not to disrespect Rafael Lovato Jr. He is an insanely good submission grappler. The man has like 7,000 international gold medals for a jiu-jitsu competition. But like to make that style work against Israel Adesanya, the UFC middleweight champion, you would have to take him down. And that seems like a pretty hard wall to run up against. If conversely, if you can't take him down, Adesanya is the striker's equivalent of Lovato, or at least as close as you can get in MMA. Like a truly phenomenal specialist who, I don't know, who's the best? Because the thing is for a jiu-jitsu guy, Lovato is quite a good wrestler. He's got like a fully developed wrestling game. He's not just entirely dependent on a single kind of shot. He's a pretty competent chain wrestler. But, there's a difference between like taking down Gegard Mousasi and taking down Israel Adesanya. And I don't know if Derek Brunson couldn't do it, if Brad Tavares couldn't find a way to do it, if Kelvin Gastelum couldn't do it. I don't know. I guess Lovato's maybe a better wrestler than some of these guys, but also Adesanya has shown like the correct responses. This is the thing, is that people always want to talk about like level of competition, but you can judge someone's competency even against a lower level of competition by just evaluating whether or not they're using the right techniques. And Adesanya is always doing the right things. He is always digging for his underhooks. He's framing to create space. He doesn't hang around once he has created space. He is then moving his feet, creating more space, clearing an arm, and getting out. Like his wrestling defense is really on point. And without that, Lovato Jr., again, like for a jiu-jitsu guy, not a bad striker, but this just seems like a classic every fight begins on the feet kind of problem for him.
Yeah, I mean, I think Adesanya is probably an easier matchup for Lovato than, for example, Robert Whittaker or any of the other recent UFC middleweight champions who would all be just absolute nightmares for him in his prime. Big, strong, powerful wrestlers, and with the exception of Michael Bisping, I guess. I don't know. I think it would be interesting. It would be a fight I would actually like to see, because Lovato Jr. he's not as panicked about his wrestling as Brunson was. He's obviously a better wrestler than Brad Tavares, who it also looks like might just be a bit shot at this point. Like you said, the thing that impressed me against Mousasi was his diversity of takedowns.
Uh-huh.
Like, it was the fact that he was able to like chain wrestle up against the fence. He got Gegard down with like a really nice knee tap at one point. He's just and that's the thing, is that you can never against someone like that. Someone like Adesanya, you can never entirely tell how deep their wrestling defense goes. Because, I mean, Gastelum did get him down, but almost immediately found himself in a triangle.
Uh-huh.
And that's fine. That's not a bad response to have, because it worked.
Uh-huh.
But it would also be a response that, would work, would be a terrible idea against someone like Lovato Jr. And, Adesanya isn't someone where I'm willing to just say, where it's like, if I've seen Robert Whittaker on one leg repeatedly show freakish takedown defense against Yoel Romero, I'm basically just willing to say this guy is virtually impossible to wrestle. I'm not willing to say that about Adesanya.
That's fair.
But other than that, so yeah, with a dogged guy with a huge selection of takedowns, I think, and the fact that if he got it to the ground, the fight might just be over. I think that's the kind of interesting fight I like to see, like, champions get tested with, but it's not one where I would be able to favor Lovato Jr. in any way.
Okay, that's fair. I think that's maybe a slightly more even-handed approach to this fight. I mean, yeah, again, Lovato Jr. Is like, I don't even know how to describe like the quality of his ground game. Incredibly suffocating, controlling grappler. I do think that like just getting in on a shot against someone like Gegard Mousasi is much easier than getting in the correct range to complete a shot against Israel Adesanya. So being able to work all of those chain wrestling options, it's just a more like accessible route to go. But that is absolutely fair that like compared to the likes of Chris Weidman or especially Robert Whittaker, Israel Adesanya is probably the guy that Lovato Jr. would actually have a shot at beating. All right. Well, now we come to the one that is like most interesting to me, Douglas Lima. I don't know if I want to revise people's understanding of Douglas Lima. I think Douglas Lima is fucking great. I really enjoy watching him fight. I don't know how well he matches up against Kamaru Usman, Phil. I gotta be honest with you. I think Douglas Lima is phenomenal, but also like he's one of those fighters who has such gaping holes in his game that I really can't see defending him as the best welterweight in the world. To me, like, I don't know. You got to be pretty good at everything. You can't just be like remarkably easy to take down. You know what I mean? Like, that's a bad flaw to have in modern MMA as a champion.
Did he give up a single takedown against Rory Mack in their most recent fight?
I don't know that he did in the most recent one.
Yeah, I mean, so that's the thing, is that it makes Douglas Lima interesting, is that he's a guy that has clearly adapted. He's one of the rare guys in MMA where we've seen him have multiple rematches,
That's
as in
true.
more than one, against high-level opponents. And we've seen that he is actually clearly a very smart and hard-working fighter, because he's turned like losses into shutout wins. He's very, and it's, as we've mentioned, multiple times, style matchups don't change. It's relatively rare to see that kind of thing change.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was still something that we predicted to happen, particularly in the case of the Rory McDonald fight, because we were just like, there's only really 2 or 3 things he needs to do to change this fight into being a nightmare for Rory, and he did them. But it is worth, I think, it is worth noting that this guy has picked up on the tendencies of Lorenz Larkin and Rory McDonald, and just been able to completely shut them out of fights when he's gone back to fight them.
Did he fight Lorenz Larkin twice?
Sorry, did I mean Lorenz Larkin? I meant
Andrei Koreshkov.
Yeah.
Well, they're so similar. You know, they look almost
identical. They fight the same, look the same.
And of course, roundly dominated Ben Saunders in their 2 fights. Yeah, okay, that's true. That's true. Like, Lima is a fighter who has made the right adjustments. Some of that, of course, like, Rory McDonald was so close to losing the first fight with Douglas Lima. And like, with judges with slightly different preferences, it would be easy to say, like, oh, he lost that fight. Or, you know, rather, Douglas Lima won that fight. He chewed Rory's leg up. Like, these are options. These are openings that were always going to be there in the second fight. And then in that second fight, I don't really know what Rory was doing, like what his intent was. He seemed to think like that he was just going to go in there and just shoot for takedowns, like really, really tentatively pressuring, not much output. He allowed Douglas to fight a very low output fight. And he also allowed Douglas to very easily sniff out the takedowns when they were coming. Like there was not a lot of confusion created by Rory McDonald that gave Douglas any trouble in telling when a takedown was or was not coming. And like that, this is where you have to match up with you have to talk about the not level of competition, but just the styles that he has been faced with. Like Rory McDonald and Andrei Koreshkov, like these are the best takedown artists, right? That he's fought. And a Rory McDonald who was already, I think, past his best in their first fight, and then definitely way past his best, and certainly, I don't know, to my eyes, did not look well prepared for the matchup. And then Andrei Koreshkov, who does, you know, is a strong wrestler, but also like, I just don't know, man. Like, I just don't see Douglas Lima getting pushed into the fence, and he has a style that absolutely allows him to get pushed into the fence, and getting clinched up by Kamaru Usman and not getting taken down. And he did give up a couple of takedowns, I think, in the second fight with Rory McDonald, and then like immediately scrambled out of them. I just don't know that that's an option in the same way against a really tough athletic wrestler, to just like go nuts with a butterfly guard and roll around and then just expect to get them off of you every time. Like, I don't know. Modern day Rory McDonald is not a great fighter to me.
No, I kind of have to agree. So yeah, I think the main thing about that second fight with Rory McDonald is that Lima was able to neutralize almost all of the takedowns, but it came at a very sort of a kind of outdated cost, which is that he had to lower his pace and and fight at a pretty glacial pace, whilst just prioritizing, you know, sprawling and fighting off the takedowns.
Yeah,
he was just like, I know I hit much harder than this guy shot for shot, so I'm not gonna pull the trigger on anything unless I'm absolutely sure it's going to connect. And other than that, I'm just going to try and defend takedowns, and that's it. And yeah, that doesn't seem like it would work against Kamaru Usman. I think it's yeah, he would just have to fight a more aggressive fight than he did this time, and that would again open him up for the takedowns.
Yeah.
If he fought this way, he would end up pushed up against the cage. Usman has shown himself to be disgustingly durable. And I think, yeah, he'd probably just be able to get his takedowns rolling. I do think Douglas Lima is very, very good.
Absolutely.
like as you mentioned. I think there are many welterweight champions in the past that I think he would probably beat pretty handily. I think he would have beaten Lawler without much problem, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that's a very winnable fight for him.
I think who else? Like the Tyron Woodley fight would have been weird as hell and probably terrible.
God, I mean, it would be the kind of fight where Tyron would definitely want to take him down. Probably would, but would he be able to do that consistently? Like, I think that's the kind of wrestler matchup where just the insane scrambling might have had an effect. And otherwise, I don't know. It depends, because like Tyron Woodley showed that great top game and ground and pound against Darren Till, but not in basically any other fight where he was on top of his opponent.
Oh, he fucked up Wonderboy pretty bad.
Wonderboy too.
I think yeah, that's definitely not a Woodley weakness anymore. I think he really is pretty dangerous from top position now.
Yeah, definitely a later career development for Tyron Woodley though. Okay, I guess that's fair. Championship Woodley, good top game. God, I don't know.
So weird.
Super low output from both guys, or would Douglas...
Both men just retreat into the fence at the start of the round and glare at each other.
Just circling 30 feet apart from each other. Backs to the cage. Yeah, I don't know about that one. Because the thing is like, for all of his... and this is so often the case, like for all of his technical shortcomings... which is not to say that there's a ton. Like, it really is just the wrestling for Douglas Lima that I'm still not convinced is, like, solved. But he is an incredible athlete. And, like, he can really cheat his way out of a lot of bad positions and situations. Crazy scrambling, huge power. He seems to be very strong. And just, like, yeah, like a lot of great fighting athletes, like, super intuitive with his positioning. Knows when to post, knows when there's a little bit of space, that this is the opportunity to spring back to his feet. Doesn't hesitate in those crazy back and forth moments. He is like cat-like in scrambles. So I think that would go a long way against a lot of people. I don't know though. I don't know how a Woodley fight would shake out. I sure as hell don't believe he would beat GSP. He would get wrecked by George. I don't know. I have a lot of respect for Douglas Lima. I think he's great. I just think like his specific stylistic limitations would be really rough against someone like Usman, and certainly against someone like GSP, and possibly against someone like Woodley, except that Woodley has his own massive stylistic limitations. So, yeah.
Yep.
All right.
Basically co-sign on all that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, lightweight and featherweight, our next Bellator champ, one of my faves, Patricio Freire. Freire. Pitbull. It's Pitbull, folks. Patricio Pitbull. I love Pitbull, man. He's awesome. He's so fun to watch. He's remarkably technical, like Douglas Lima, like Rafael Lovato Jr. He is another fighter who has continually made adjustments and changes, whose style has morphed and evolved over the course of his career. He is also like, he's sort of like if Robbie Lawler just got to be champ forever. Because, like, I don't know, man. I can't think of another, like, champ as, like, long reigning or as consistently successful. Even when he has had his shortcomings and his bumps in the road, has still come back to, like, regain the title and be incredibly successful. I can't think of another guy who has that level of success while also being such a fucking dog. Like, Patricio Pitbull goes to war with people, and just throws down and slugs it out. And he is now, like, let's see, 32 years old, has been doing this shit since 2004 was his pro debut, and he's still out there fucking slanging leather and getting into scraps. And around the same time as Henry Cejudo, I think there's some coaching and management similarities there. He became Karate Pitbull as well. So I just like that he's constantly evolving, always being a damn gamer, willing to throw down with people, and remarkably successful despite that, or perhaps because of it.
Yeah. You can't really, like, he's one of the more surprisingly successful products of the Bellator machine, because there's clearly been guys throughout Bellator that they've favored, that they've been like, oh yeah, these are our guys that we want to build the brand of. I don't think Pitbull was ever really that guy.
Yeah.
But, you know, I mean, and yeah, he's come a long ass way from getting split decisions by Joe Warren in a not particularly like great decision from what I can remember, to then like knocking out Michael Chandler, because those two matchups, you know, if we talk about our things that style matchups never change, Joe Warren and Michael Chandler are not dissimilar fighters, but Michael Chandler is way better at everything.
Yes.
Like, he is far bigger, far more powerful, far more explosive, and like the idea that someone could lose to one guy and then go on to, you know, beat the other one later on in their career, like, it's good stuff.
What if Joe Warren, but like an athletic freak and more durable?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a weight class up.
Yes. That being said, like, I'm not, it's hard to sell me on how predictive that result is for potential future, for potential rematches between Chandler and Pitbull. Cause like, you spend a minute on the feet feeling each other out, and then like it's I don't know, you just blitz someone with the first shot you land, and that's the fight. It's the beauty of combat sports that can happen. But also, you know, who's to say? But the thing is that, for like the speed and the power and the durability, that Pitbull has, all of these things that make him a phenomenal striker, he's also such a fucking good wrestler. Like, I don't know this, I guess in my mind, I've every once in a while I forget. I'm just like, oh, he's a fantastic kickboxer. His game is continually evolving, but both offensively and defensively, he's a remarkably strong wrestler and scrambler. So I don't know. I don't really remember that first fight with Joe Warren, but since then, like, who has consistently taken Pitbull down, and who has like, he's taken down some really great wrestlers as well. He took down Daniel Strauss. Oh fuck! I just looked at the Ben Henderson fight. I forgot about that. I was just looking at his Wikipedia here, and forgot about that result. But you know, like, he's a remarkably well-rounded fighter. He's a great submission fighter. But I'm always astounded by his like Jose Aldo-esque takedown defense and wrestling ability. That is obviously what makes him that's like the most compelling quality in a potential fight with Khabib Nurmagomedov, which I still have a hard time saying goes his way, because you know, Khabib even more durable than Michael Chandler, I think. Similarly athletically freakish. Way more aggressive and single-minded in what he wants to do. Like, maybe he certainly doesn't have Michael Chandler's knockout power, but that's probably to his benefit, because he's not willing to spend any fight where he should be out wrestling his opponent trying to knock them out. I don't know. Like, any thoughts on how the massive lightweight Khabib would match up against the obviously very undersized lightweight Pitbull?
Yeah, so the main fights that come to mind here are the series against, not necessarily Chandler or Warren, but the series against Daniel Strauss. Mm-hmm. Because that was Pitbull against someone who was huge and relentless and Strauss's problem is historically that he has just too much beta in him. Like, I think we might have commented on this before. It is a strange thing that there are so many people in Bellator who seem to have the ability to look like super composed and well, like, put together fighters, and then just completely detonate at some point.
Yeah.
Like, it's presumably why it's the perfect home for Ryan Bader.
Mm-hmm.
But Daniel Strauss is a great example of that. A really quality fighter who would just sometimes absolutely shit the bed.
Yep.
And out of their 3 fights, Strauss basically won 2 of them.
Yeah.
He Straussed it up in their first one, I think, at the end of the fight. Didn't he get... It was one of his, I'm just going to get guillotined at the end of this fight things, right? That I'm winning. So. He did. I swear he did this to both Pitbull and Pat Curran.
Yes.
He was just like winning both these fights, and he was just like, well, time to get guillotined.
I think it was a rear naked choke, but...
that was the one.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's exactly how it played out. Firmly in control, up on the scorecards, and then just give up and then show like no apparent interest in defending the rear naked choke. Like one of those situations where you just have both hands on the mat and you just let the guy get under your neck, get under your chin. It like you said, the weird thing where he just seems to just want it to happen.
Yeah,
full self-destruction.
So yeah, I mean, I don't think those fights told us a lot about Pitbull's defensive wrestling ability, because he did stuff the vast majority of the takedowns, but they were just physical grinds where he spent tons of time in the clinch, and he just got worn out, and it was clear that Strauss was way bigger than him, and it was one of those fights where you could really see the size difference telling, and him being against someone who knows how to make a size difference tell. Yeah.
And that was at featherweight.
Yeah. And, so I just couldn't pick Khabib. I couldn't pick him to beat Khabib just for that reason. Khabib's just too big for him.
Yeah. He's like 180, 190, something like that. Like I said, there's a reason I brought up the predictive quality of the outcome in the Chandler fight. It's like, even in that fight, I don't know how that would go if they were to run it back, because if Pitbull doesn't knock out Michael Chandler, is Chandler's size and athleticism alone enough to just like swamp Pitbull and make him fight defensively from positions where he's not necessarily like objectively losing the fight, but just isn't getting any offense going. And yeah, I just don't see that. I don't see how that couldn't be the case against Khabib. More interesting, though. Very interesting, in fact. Pitbull versus Alex Volkanovski. And we may as well also talk about a potential Pitbull versus Max Holloway fight here as well, since he was just recently dethroned. But this, to me, is quite compelling. Alex Volkanovski, like, not totally dissimilar from Pitbull in a lot of ways. Certainly, especially like this latter day version of Pitbull, karate Pitbull, as I said before. Similar frame, certainly. Short arms, short guy, but like really quick and light on his feet. Throws excellent straight punches. Both men, I think maybe more so Pitbull, but increasingly we're seeing that Volkanovski is a skilled counterpuncher. At least knows how to play that part of the game with some variety in his countering output. I don't know. What do you think?
It's a tough one.
I mean, it's a fight I would love to see. I mean, that's what I mainly want to emphasize. Is like this is a fascinating matchup.
Yeah, this is the thing, is that unfortunately I feel like Pitbull has fought most of the people that I want to see him fight at this point in Bellator.
In Bellator, yeah.
And I would really like to see him in the UFC.
Yeah, same.
I think he would like to be in the UFC, to be honest. But he's 32. I don't know. He's been doing this for ages. I don't know how much longer he has left. I would like to see him, even if it might be one of those Melendez, even if it might be one of those kind of Melendez Alvarez type things, where we only get a real, tail end of his prime type situation. I would like to see him in the UFC, but against Volkanovski, I'm not really sure. I don't have a strong, because we've got to think it would probably play out on the feet, given how Volkanovski's, been approaching fights lately. I don't know how the exchanges would be initiated. I don't know how they would end up looking between these two guys. Like you said, we've seen, the fight against Chandler, for example, was very much him just waiting for a counter right hand.
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine that working terribly well against Volkanovski. He's much less likely to just blitz wildly into space. But, other than that, that's obviously not the only tool set that Patricio has.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to just favor Volkanovski by default, though.
Here's the thing, though. Okay, so Pitbull prone to counterpunching, more and more so later in his career. We definitely get a lot less of him willingly going to war with people, and these days, it ends up happening because the opponents try to meet his counterpunching tendencies with relentless aggression. It's not like that wasn't working at all for Chad Mendes against Alexander Volkanovski. You know what I mean? It's not like it's difficult. It's certainly difficult to counter Volkanovski. The feinting, the jabs, the pressuring footwork, but also in that Jose Aldo fight, it probably would have been better for Jose to just accept that he was going to get hit and just throw fucking counters, just throw heat. And I think Pitbull has that and is incredibly durable. So when it comes down to a situation in which your passivity invites aggression from the opponent, at least Pitbull has the guts to just throw down and has always had that. I don't know. Unless you're...
I don't know. I think before the Volkanovski fight, we would have said that about Jose Aldo as well. In that, I don't know. I think that possibly due to losing long drawn out physical wars, Pitbull against guys like Strauss, and then just finishing Strauss at other points.
Yeah.
I think Pitbull has internalized, I am a finisher. This is how I fight. And that means that, I pull the trigger when I have to. And I don't know, and I think we've just seen Volkanovski improve a lot from that Chad Mendes fight as well. I don't know, having looked at the Archuleta fight, it's way too passive. And I think that maybe, I think that Pitbull might be learning some of the wrong lessons from some of his finishes lately, to be honest. That and because Volkanovski, as we mentioned, he showed against Aldo an incredible job of slowly working his way into range against someone who was determined to counter him as soon as he came in. And Aldo sort of, he's always been somebody who's less likely to go to war than Pitbull, but that's because he's just has to less.
Yeah.
He's just been able to control fights more often, but he still had the dog in him at almost all points. But it was the fact that, Volkanovski managed to do the whole, boiling the frog metaphor against him.
Yeah.
And, the fight that I'm seeing that Pitbull had against Archuleta is just not one I would see working against Volkanovski.
Yeah, that's true. The thing with Volkanovski is not just that he's he's not just he's difficult to counter. like once you get his timing, you can figure him out. Like the timing is very difficult to get with all the feinting and the weird pressure and the like just fundamentally broken rhythm that he has. But it's also his ability to use those little things as you might say, Phil, like as wedges. Like Kamaru Usman too. Like he's fantastic at building his fight, basically. Creating this little problem for you early that when round 3 rolls around, he has absolutely expanded on and is suddenly now dominating the fight. We talked about this when he fought Max Holloway. Like in that fight, Max still managed to come on a little more by the end. He certainly had more moments, but to be in a fight with Max Holloway where he's just barely starting to like win the rounds by rounds 4 and 5, I think that speaks to a certain ability to continually ramp up and build off of the previous round successes as the fight goes on. So yeah, I think I tend to agree that passivity would be an issue. The thing is what I meant to say before is not just that, certainly not that Jose Aldo doesn't have a dog in him. That's what his burgers are made of. So he's got tons of dogs in him. No, but, there is a bit, I think, of Jose Aldo at like the whole story of Jose Aldo's career, informs what happened in that fight. Patricio has had to go to war more, and I think that might actually be to his favor. Like, I think he's a lot less likely when someone is, just constantly pressuring and landing more and more shots as the fight goes on to just not like swing back and go nuts. And I do think, looking at the Jose Aldo fight, that like if Jose had just contented himself with the fact that he was going to eat some shots, and ignored more of those feints and just put combinations together, which I think that informed his performance against Marlon Moraes. Like, he really didn't like what happened to him against Volkanovski. That up at his ideal weight class in the Volkanovski fight, that may have actually worked okay for him. Oh, Jesus. So, I don't know. It's really interesting. I don't know. Patricio is like one of those really maddeningly unpredictable fighters, but I don't know. I guess Volkanovski, but it does sort of feel like I'm defaulting to him.
Little bit. Yeah.
And bantamweight champ. Oh God, is it Kyoji Horiguchi still?
Yep, is indeed.
Ugh. I'm thinking of his his fight with Kai Asakura, and it's making me more sick again. My flu is now morphed into a stomach flu. I need to go to the bathroom. Well, I don't know. How do we evaluate Kyoji Horiguchi? I feel like
don't worry, because Kai Asakura turned out to be, the next big thing.
What do you mean, Phil?
Didn't he just get knocked out?
Oh, did he? Did I miss this? Did I miss this entirely?
Oh no, sorry, he didn't. Yeah, he got knocked out by Manel Kape.
By Manel Kape? What? Damn.
Yeah.
Tragedy.
Yeah.
Well, that's all right. That kind of
falling apart.
I know. It's just getting worse and worse.
All right, so let's get through this.
We can make it.
We can.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of thing happens. Like, I'm sure I could think of another example of someone who comes along and like dusts a top champion, and then you think they're going to be the next big thing, and then they just completely shit the bed in their next fight. I don't know. Like, the tricky thing is with evaluating Kyoji Horiguchi, these damn vaping scooter kids, they seem to have this tendency of wanting to say that someone is shot the moment they lose. Especially their favorite fighters, which I get. You want to, it feels safer. It's a security blanket. I can just be like, oh, they suck now. I don't have to be hopeful about them winning their next fight or coming back. I'm going to protect myself by saying that they're done. But I don't know, like the Asakura knockout, like I think you and I sort of felt that was like an inevitability for Kyoji Horiguchi. We certainly didn't expect Kai Asakura to be the guy to do it, but when, you know, it's like Robert Whittaker, like when your style is built around leaping in to the pocket, like someone is going to have the wherewithal to plant their feet and counter you on the way in. So I'm just going to go ahead and assume that Kyoji Horiguchi is still the Kyoji Horiguchi we know and love, and ask how that matches up against the likes of Henry Cejudo. And I don't know. It's not one. The thing is, like, Henry Cejudo's main asset is just having a titanium head. Like, as far as I can tell, in his more recent fights, like, his main asset is just being unkillable and knowing that he's unkillable, fighting as if he cannot be knocked out. And if you, like, beat him up decently enough, then he just goes fucking Hulk berserk, and tries to walk you down and brawl with you. That might work against Kyoji Horiguchi. Like, the thing with Horiguchi is he has never been above throwing down with someone. He is a big, dynamic kind of striker. You know what I mean? Like, full body weight commitment, big, full-powered swings. The tricky thing with him has always been his timing, how he feints and confuses the opponent to set these things up. But like Robert Whittaker, when he throws, it's full commitment. And so if you can walk him into a position where he has to throw back, if you can pressure him, then you are going to get him to trade. So the question is, like, can Kyoji Horiguchi knock Henry Cejudo out? Like, can he?
I mean, yeah, definitely. I think he is also a huge puncher and always has been.
Yeah.
He's maybe not the absolute top echelon of sort of flyweight, bantamweight punchers, but
he's certainly up there.
He's very, very high. So, yeah, so, I mean, I think so the thing for this one, it seems to be that Kyoji Horiguchi's wrestling defense has a bit of a limiter on it, where it just falls off. Because he's got performances where he's looked fairly untouchable, like his one against Ali Bagatinov. And then he's got ones like the one against Demetrius Johnson, and more recently his fights against Darian Caldwell, where you just find yourself going, ugh. I mean, on the one hand, Darian Caldwell is much larger than Kyoji Horiguchi.
Yeah.
But on the other, that was a fight where he spent a lot of the time, where he just spent, well, pretty much the entirety of both fights fighting off his back, and managed to win because Caldwell in the first fight was an idiot, and in the second fight did absolutely nothing.
Which could be perhaps called idiocy.
Yeah, just a different kind.
Yes.
The first one was like, oh, I did too much in trying to, you know, improve my position and, you know, go for ground and pound. This second time, I'm just going to hold on to him and see what happens.
This is not an overcompensation.
So, and one of the interesting things about that Johnson fight was the extent to which Johnson managed to shut down Kyoji's lateral movement by just body kicking him until he stood in a straight line, and then whenever the Gooch went for one of his trademark blitzes, just taking him off his feet with a double leg. All of that seems like it could work pretty well against. It could work pretty well for Cejudo. And I think that because, you know, he's a big body kicker, he's obviously, you know, a strong wrestler, all that kind of stuff works, I think, fairly well. What I think is the issue is that I don't think Cejudo is actually particularly ready for people who are going to fight him in the pocket like Horiguchi can.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think Horiguchi can just. I think he is simply a better pocket fighter than Cejudo is. And we kind of saw this dynamic a bit in the Benavidez fight, where Benavidez just picked up a lot of counter right hands against Cejudo, who just shrugged them off. And I think Horiguchi has a lot more depth in the pocket than Benavidez does. He's a much more two-handed fighter. He has a nasty left hook. I think when he's actually given the opportunity to significantly get his game rolling on the feet, I think he is a much more complex fighter than Cejudo is, and I think that could lead to very bad things for Cejudo. Yeah. Again, I'm still not sure that Cejudo couldn't just bundle him over. As I said, it's very hard to gauge Horiguchi's wrestling defense because sometimes it looks impenetrable and sometimes it's just not there.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure I agree with that. I'm not sure if I think that Horiguchi is a deeper pocket striker than the likes of Joe Benavidez. Like I said, he just tends to sell out on a lot of what he does. It's a lot of 3-2s. With a little roll or a slip thrown in between the shots. And I'm not sure that I see him doing remarkably well past, can you think of any examples where he's gotten into deep exchanges with someone, past the third or fourth punch and looked really sharp still? Usually it's a 2-3 and then reset, right?
Maybe you're right. This is the thing, is that when he's gotten into punching exchanges recently, he mostly has just been annihilating people.
Right,
so,
yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to say.
It's tricky. There are other examples of great exchanges. To me, still one of his best performances ever was just most rounded performances was his domination of Neil Seery. But that's a huge athletic gulf between those two fighters. And otherwise, with pressure being constantly put on, I don't know how much has changed since then, but we saw how that played out against Demetrius Johnson, and Kyoji got tired and discouraged by the end of that fight. The interesting thing here is Cejudo's approach of doing that is just so much dumber than the one that Demetrius Johnson used. It's just I'm going to eat shots. I definitely think he could create a lot of the same exchanges that Benavidez created, and that fight was so close that I really can't say who won it. And I think at this point, Kyoji is probably a harder hitter than Joe Benavidez.
Oh yeah, definitely at this point, yes.
But I don't know. This is the thing. This is why every time we've mentioned that Henry Cejudo is one of the best in the world, it just comes with it's just dripping with remorse. His style, his big wins have just come in such dumb fashion. But that's the thing, is it might just work. Just being willing to eat whatever Kyoji Horiguchi throws, and if he can survive it, I think Kyoji Horiguchi punches himself out and starts losing that fight after about 2 or 3 rounds.
I'm gonna pick Kyoji. I think it would be an interesting fight. I think that both these guys kind of rely. Yeah, I think both these guys rely on the blitz, and I think Horiguchi is in some ways just a little more comfortable in that style. And I think that, I think a lot of Cejudo's approach in the pocket just relies on him punching a lot until the other guy agrees to go away.
Yeah.
And I'm just not sure that would work against someone like And I agree that like he does. We've never seen him go super deep into exchanges, but I don't think he would have to go that far.
Yeah,
like, I think he only really has to hit Cejudo twice, and like as much as Cejudo has an incredible chin, I don't really think that he's fought someone quite like Horiguchi. If he's just in full-on stand there punching mode and someone just clocks him as hard as he can, he's not an immortal.
Yeah, I mean, I think too, like in the first round of Cejudo's fight with Marlon Moraes, like it's not like he has yet convinced himself to be insane pressure fighter all the time. He got absolutely chewed up with low kicks in that first round of that fight. Against Kyoji Horiguchi, it would be a lot fewer low kicks, but more darting right hands. I think he's absolutely much longer and better practiced at that blitzing karate style. I also think that Kyoji Horiguchi is like would really, really benefit from being back in the octagon as opposed to a ring. 'Cause like he's got these big bounding style of footwork. Being able to move around. I'm not really sure how good a pressure fighter Cejudo is. Like there was certainly a chip on Marlon's shoulder in that fight. Wanting to like that's also just in his style is like this desire to plant your feet and scare the opponent off. Like if you go back and watch his fight with Shayman Moraes, like that fight is very close to slipping out of Marlon's hands at several points. And he prevents that from happening each time by planting his feet and knocking Shayman down. And against Henry Cejudo, when he couldn't do that, he just like he got himself deeper and deeper into debt, basically. Like he was in too deep to having already agreed to exchange with Cejudo. It was a lost cause fallacy kind of fight. He just had to keep going until he completely fell apart and got knocked out himself. I don't think Horiguchi does that. And having the space of the octagon to run around in, I don't know. It's definitely an interesting fight. But God, I just don't know. I don't even know how to evaluate Henry Cejudo, dude. Like,
yeah.
I don't even know. At this point, I'm just content to be surprised by whatever the fuck happens in his fights. But that's an interesting one. And goddamn it, I want to see Kyoji Horiguchi back in the UFC. I'm not convinced that he is shot just because he got knocked out. It was going to happen eventually. Bring him back. Okay.
Yep.
Well, there is no flyweight champion in Bellator. And at least according to Wikipedia, I wasn't sure that they actually had stripped Cejudo. But Wikipedia says no flyweight champ in the UFC. Which is the right move. I mean, we have enough divisions just being held up by one champion not fighting. We do not need to have one person sitting on top of two divisions and not defending. So that one's null. I don't think there's any point in discussing women's featherweight because that is Julia Budd versus Amanda Nunes. And we've already talked about several fights here where style matchups change over the course of their career, but Amanda Nunes did knock out Julia Budd in 14 seconds in 2011. I don't know how much that has changed, but probably not enough to make it interesting. But women's flyweight is actually interesting. Valentina Shevchenko versus Lima McFarland is the last one to discuss. Valentina is really just a villain. You know, she's just an evil presence in the Ultimate Fighting Championship, and I like to believe that this is really the case, really the one situation in which Bellator has like possibly the best contender to beat Valentina. Like the UFC's women's flyweight division is so incredibly shallow and underdeveloped. But Alima Lay McFarland, like a lot of these Bellator champions that we've discussed, has like made really excellent improvements, especially over the recent portion of her career. Like her striking has really grown and improved. She is a tremendously well-rounded fighter. She has defended her Bellator title 3 or 4 times. and so has definitely shown like the ability to maintain her stamina and control her pace for 5 rounds. And I don't know, like, as much as like I do respect Valentina, of course.
How did that not send you off into a coughing fit?
Hold on. All right, there we go. I do respect Valentina, but also, like, her opponents aren't that great, folks. Like, I just have to say it. Like, Jessica Ai, Liz Carmouche, the Joanna Jędrzejczyk fight was remarkable, of course. Very, very impressive. I think a really bad style matchup for Joanna, and in retrospect, it certainly looks that way. And given the way that all of their other fights played out, I should have relied on the truth that style matchups almost never change. But, you know, like, she's such a negative fighter. Does so very... Is what I mean by that is, like, not even remotely proactive against the vast majority of opponents. I just don't know. I don't see any argument for why McFarland couldn't possibly beat her.
I mean, I don't think she could, like, it's not outside the realms of possibility, but it's also, you know, you couldn't obviously favor her to beat. Because it's still just too early. Like, she's still clearly a developing fighter, and one of the reasons why Shevchenko is so buttoned up is that Shevchenko has clearly decided exactly who she is as a fighter and is pretty much just polishing up who she is at the time. I mean, we're a year away from McFarland dropping a round to Valerie Letourneau, who is, I think, you know, a decent fighter. She's, you know, always been pretty underrated as a sort of big, aggressive, hard to get rid of, like, and fairly well-rounded fighter. But, you know, at this, if you wanted her to be able to fight Valentina Shevchenko, you either need her to be shutting someone like that out or completely wiping them off the face of the earth, like, immediately. You know, you need to either show remarkable technical consistency or just insane, like, physical power. And I don't think Lima McFarland has shown either of those things quite yet. I think she's dynamic and, you know, and developing quickly and interestingly. But I think it's, like I said, it's just too early. I mean, the other thing is, though, is that I don't think there's much of an age difference between these two.
2 years.
There's obviously a big difference in fight years, but yeah, I think Shevchenko's 31 and McFarland's 29. So, you know, got a few years of Shevchenko yet.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, this is always what gets me. This is, like, always my greatest failing as an analyst, is, like, underrating the effectiveness of just sheer athletic ability. I think in some ways Shevchenko has, like, done a remarkably good job of hiding that. Which is why the Jędrzejczyk fight was such a shock, because she's not, as I said, like, she's not proactive. She's not like Yoel Romero, just, like, going out there and stunting on people with crazy athletic moves. And so only when you give her an opponent who is just brave enough to run into the wood chipper again and again do you realize how dangerous that wood chipper actually is. So in all likelihood, despite her well-roundedness, and her composure and the fact that she does have, like, a good functional jab and some strong low kicks, the more aggressive McFarland got, the more she would find herself just getting shut down in clinches and running into hard counters. It just,
I'm glad we got to end this little experiment on this note. Just bumming Conor the fuck out.
It just sucks. Okay. Well, there you go. That's our little, as Phil said, our little experiment, comparing, Bellator champs to, UFC champs. Let this be the, beginning of a year in which we, look a little more at Bellator cards and Ryzen cards and do not feel the need to handcuff ourselves quite so much to the UFC. That's certainly the first time I've said something like that, but also like, man, fuck the UFC. Like, it's just, most of these cards just ain't that fucking good. And you know, Bellator has, put out some really interesting shit, in 2019. And like, I love Patricio Freire. I love Douglas Lima. Rafael Lovato Jr. seems really great. Like, these are some really top-notch fighters. I think we really hit a point where like Bellator is absolutely on a par with what Strikeforce was back in the day, as like an organization where if the UFC were to purchase it, God forbid, and all of those fighters were to come running over to the UFC roster, a lot of people would be shocked at just how successful they were. It's like a very comparable organization with a really strong roster. So, yep, that's that. Thank you guys so much for suffering through my sick brain and my sick voice, and Phil's as well. Although I have to be honest, I think Phil, was it your friend who said that when I was sick, that my voice was even sexier than usual?
I'm not going to pump up your already disgustingly bloated ego with any more comments from my friends about how sexy your voice is.
I think I did hear one comment like, man, sick Conor is hot. And so I need to hear more of that. After this episode comes out, that's going to really pump us up for next week's episode, which will, of course, be about UFC 246. I'm going to try to get all of my cynicism about the behind-the-scenes workings. Oh, my God. Sorry, I just got distracted. I looked at the Wikipedia page for UFC 246 and saw this absolute dog shit poster that they put together. What's
wrong with it? The two men are exactly divided down the middle, so
it's complete bullshit. So I'm going to try to work out all of my cynicism regarding that fight. Well, you know, it's not my cynicism; it's the UFC's cynicism. Like when Dana White is like,
"Can I also have to interrupt? You have seen the Conor T-shirt, right?"
Oh my God! Yes. He looks like, someone said he looks like Brendan Gleeson.
I think my contribution was like Conor, Popeye the Sailor Man, and a grieving middle-aged insurance agent in a motor accident.
He does look really fretful, you know? He looks really worried. He's like, oh God, he's like struggling over some tax forms, just pulling his hair out. Poor little guy. Yeah, you know, the whole matchup is fucking bullshit. Like that, everything around it makes me so mad. Like Dana White's like, I can't believe people are disrespecting Conor McGregor or disrespecting Cowboy Cerrone. That's certainly not what I'm doing by setting him up in this matchup where he's clearly intended to lose so that we can give Conor McGregor another undeserved title shot. How dare all of these damn media types disrespect Donald Cerrone by pretending, or by not, you know, by seeing exactly why we made this matchup, seeing it for exactly for what it is. So I'm going to get all of these feelings out in a video coming out on the MMANation.com YouTube channel. Phil, do you have anything coming out before next week?
I do not. I'm still, well, A, ill, but B, like, reveling, albeit reveling in a kind of ill and tired way in not having to write anything. Nice. Beautiful. Enjoy it. Thank you guys for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Like I said, next week we'll be back covering a UFC card, and hopefully both of us will be feeling up to snuff, and our voices will also be back to normal, and I will be at a level of sexiness that will not make Phil feel intimidated
or uncomfortable. Until then, find us on social media. I'm at Boxing Bush on Twitter. Phil is at Evil Greg Jackson. And you can find all of our writings and whatnot on bloodyelbow.com. And we'll talk to you guys next week. Until then, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.